Morning, thank you. Thank you for being here. So my name is Simone Billson and I'm going to speak to you today about the classical method of education and why we actually need this so desperately in our world today. Has it ever struck you as odd or unfortunate that today, when the proportion of literacy is higher than it has ever been, people should have become susceptible to the influence of advertisement and mass propaganda to an extent hitherto unheard of and unimagined? Dorothy Sayers wrote this essay, where this is excerpt from, in 1947. If it was relevant then, how much more relevant is it today? Okay. In our world today, more people have access to education than ever before, but we see literacy rates dropping, unemployment is getting higher, and it seems like the world is just at a point where people struggle to think for themselves. As I've mentioned, my name is Simone. I'm married to Michael. I've got 3 boys. We started our schooling career with our children in the private sector, private schooling, and very quickly we were disillusioned by what was offered and what happened there. We were told that my child was not going to be able to progress without medication, and that there were so many support things that had to be put in place. We did the support, we did the interventions, we did not do the medication, but we did not see the results we wanted to see, and we decided to take the big leap and jump out of it. At that point, now it's on us, okay? And I started researching endlessly. You come out of a system and you think, well, now I'm going to do this perfectly. I'm going to find the perfect curriculum, with a perfect setup at home, with the perfect set of things, and quickly you realize it's not so easy. And that's when I knew that we probably had to de-school ourselves first, so I de-schooled my kids and myself, and at the same time I just kept on researching. Those with wisdom that went ahead of us advised me, write down the goals for your children and just let them play. They were young at the time, so it was easy. I researched, I read, I prayed, I did a lot of things. And that's when a friend told me about classical education. One of the things that I wrote down that I wanted for my kids as one of our educational goals was for them to love God, to have excellent character. We wanted them to be able to adapt in the ever-changing world that we're in, and we wanted them to be able to study anything. And as I learned about classical education, those boxes were ticked. So classical education is the cultivation of wisdom and virtue by nourishing the soul on truth, goodness, and beauty by means of the 7 liberal arts. And I'll go into detail a bit later. It is a conscious return to the ancient goal of education, teaching children to think and learn for themselves. It's a very important distinction between what else is available at offer. And we impart to them the tools of learning. The goal is to promote a type of inquiry that ultimately allows our students to discover for themselves what is true and good and beautiful. In classical education, we embrace the concept of educating the whole child, and the notion that the child is more than their standardized test results. Classical education offers a virtuous education and a content-rich curriculum. So before I go any further to describe to you what classical education is, I think it's a good point to just look at what is the differences and compare it to a modern education. So if we think of a modern education or the outcome-based education, which is very prevalent in our world today, they both have a curriculum and textbooks. We've got that. They've got children and educators. You need that. And they've got very specific outcomes. They both are educational methods driven by a very specific philosophy. Both are very structured and they provide learning opportunities. And both education systems do the following. They have a cost to them. Okay. This can differ substantially. The cost can be financial, time, emotional, and spiritual. They do promise to provide an education. So the definition for education can differ widely, but let's go on the assumption that both of these education philosophies do promise to provide an education for your children. And they will take time. No, there is no quick fix. Even though we live in a microwave society, there is no quick fix to education. So if they have so much in common, what are the differences? A modern education is very often student-centered. They aim to see what the child needs, and it's centered around the child and their needs and their enjoyment. A classical education, though, and when I refer to a classical education today, I'm referring to classical Christian education. It is God-centered. We are saying that all subjects are woven together with God in the middle. Then, a modern education has teachers or subject experts. These subjects are very often taught in isolation, whereas in a classical education, we have mentors. And in the homeschooling environment, the parents are the lead learners alongside their children. Modern education is very often a silo education. Each subject is seen as a separate learning. And there's very often a disconnect because it's taught by a subject expert and the connections is not taking place. Whereas we're saying in a classical education, everything is woven together. So we are constantly trying to help our children make the connections and ask the questions to see how it fits together. A modern education gives you and works towards a very specific outcome. And very often, that is to get an end exam, to be able to get you into the next phase of learning. Whereas in a classical education, we say, we don't just want to get to an end exam, we want to teach our children how, so that when they are done, they can do anything. Assessment is a big thing. And we know in the modern educational system, assessment is standardized. You've got a specific set of knowledge or skills that you need to be able to show, and everybody is assessed in exactly the same way. Whereas in a classical education, our assessment is focused on how the learning has been applied. Learning opportunities, we provide those opportunities, and we want our children to ask the questions and to see how they make the connections. We want assessment to bless them and not to be a stressful event. The modern education system is also very much focused on job training. It's linked to economic value add. How and what, where does this go to? Even though in classical education we also know that our children need to be able to do a certain job, the focus though is on whole person training, whole person development, lifelong learning. So that by the time they're done, they are not so glad that they are done, but that they are excited for the next phase of learning and of life. And then the last thing is, in a modern education, it's very often driven by rewards and achievements. Whereas we're saying in classical, virtue training is one of the most important things we can do. And by doing the hard things, we get to love what we do. I think one of the most final distinctions I can make is that modern education embraces a common core of information and verify all students with a standardized test, where classical education focuses on teaching all students, the tools necessary for self-education. I want to move over and quickly talk about what is the goals in a classical education method. I've now done the comparisons, but I want to move over and just talk about the classical way of teaching. I think we are all here because we're looking for something else and a how. So the goal of classical education. In her book, Lee Bortons says the following: the purpose of a classical education is twofold: to know who you are and where you are. Okay? And as a Christian, we can actually restate this and say whose you are and to know where you are going. Education teaches us to rightly assess mankind and the world in which we live. We exchange knowledge and information and ideas through words. So classical education is very much heavy laden on words, writing. We teach critical thinking through writing skills and to be able to communicate well with other people. The goal of education should this be to teach our children to become adults who can handle complex ideas in uncertain situations with confidence. We feel confident that then we can competently manage words and ideas. And then ultimately, what we are saying is the mark of a great education is when you can teach someone else. It's no use when we are able to put forth information on paper and write an end exam, but I am not able to teach someone else what I have learned. And that is one of the big aims that we have in our classical education. So the greater purpose then is to say, no one is is excluded from any realm of human endeavor. There's 7 human endeavors: physical, spiritual, nutritional, social, emotional, intellectual, and financial. And we don't want anybody excluded from this. Albert Einstein actually said, the most important human endeavor is the striving for morality in all our actions. So, to do this requires one very involved adult with mentoring. We want our children, we want someone with very specific goals in mind to mentor the children all the way through. And that's why homeschooling classically is a brilliant way for you as a parent to be involved in your child's education all the way through. And I must tell you, for me, being here right now, I'm reclaiming my own education as well. The thing is, our children will eventually ask the why question, but why must I study all these facts? Why must I learn all these dates? Why must I learn all my math facts? It's a natural way of progressing for them. And I'm going to talk now about how that fits into the program. But then when you have an involved mentoring adult, you can actually answer those questions for them. You can start helping them to make the connections. And eventually they will move into the rhetoric phase. So we say we focus on 3 different arts in our schooling environment through the classical model. We call those the trivium. The first art is called grammar. So let me quickly ask you before I go any further, which of you have a hobby? Okay, many of us have hobbies. Maybe you do a sport. Maybe you have recently had to buy something new which you've never bought before. When you have to learn how to do this, what is the first most important thing that's actually needed for you before you can make a decision on this? You most probably let's go into something like biking. So I've got a child who's very interested in biking. He's an off-road biker and he loves that. So if he was starting this afresh, and we went into the shop and we said we want biking, and the shop assistant gave us a bicycle and said, well, there you go, my child would have learned nothing. Okay, but when I go into the shop or I start talking to someone who's passionate about this, the first thing that they will do is they will actually tell me all the different types of bikes that's there, all the different terrains that's there. They will tell me all the different materials used or what's all available in the bikes. Okay, and if you use this bike on this terrain, these pedals, all those different things, what's needed. They will give you the grammar of what you are trying to learn. And once I understand the grammar of what I'm trying to learn, then I can start asking questions. And I can put these things together and I can say, okay, so a road bike will go on these surfaces, and a mountain bike with all the different variations there will go on off-road courses. And believe me, there's a lot of options. And to make the right choices, you need to be able to have all the information and ask the right questions. And eventually, my child's at the point where he can teach someone else. He can actually tell them, listen, don't go for that, do this, do that. And that's what we want. So whether it's through learning a hobby or academic learning, we want our children to go through these phases. And as adults, we do the same. How often are you frustrated when you're asking someone a question of something you don't know? They give you an answer, but you still don't understand. We need the grammar so that we can ask the questions. So in the grammar phase, how does it look like in an academic setting? So we take our children up until about the age of 12, and we really focus on the grammar. So we teach them the foundation of all the subjects. That'll be the grammar of the vocabulary of all subjects, the definitions, the rules, the math facts, the science definitions, just so they can have a wide base of knowledge. Then around the time that they turn 12, our children are naturally asking us questions. And we are saying, well, let's teach them to ask questions well. We have a method that we call the 5 common topics, which got a wide range of questions. And I love seeing how we can implement that even in our house now. Whenever we need to make a decision, I'll ask my child these questions, and it's amazing to see how the thinking starts happening and how the connections happen. So when we apply these in our academic learning, that's where we can see the connections, and we can go deeper and we can gain an understanding. And that's what we call the dialectic phase. And eventually our children will move over to the rhetoric phase. So the rhetoric phase is then to say, well, how am I going to share what I have learned with other people? Whether it is in writing, in talking, persuading someone, doesn't matter what it is, I need to be able to teach someone else. I need to be able to stand in front of a group of people and teach them. So what we do in our program is also in our classical program, we get together once a week. So the program runs through the phases. The children will learn the grammar phase up until 12-year-old. We get together and we learn through songs and music and lots of different ways. Then when the high school program starts, we get together. The children actually come to class prepared. So we don't do formal teaching on the day. The children are prepared. They come to class and we ask the questions and we have the discussions and we make the connections. And by the time they're in their last 2 years of schooling, that's when they are really taking the ownership of presenting the class. So we want them, by the time that they are done, to teach their fellow students. So we weave the program in like that. So now you might ask me, in the world that we live in, where we are right now, with all our modern advancements, artificial intelligence and all of that, why do we need a classical education? And I want to tell you that maybe it's because of where we're at, that we still need this. We need our children to be able to ask questions. We need to be able to ask questions. And we need them to be able to see the connections, to guide them to the truth and what is real and what is beautiful, so that they can be people of high moral values and virtuous and make the right decisions. Lastly, I just want to quickly end and show you the weaving of our principles through the high school years. We say that the journey to leadership and freedom is the following. In the first year, the theme of our school year is attention leads to ownership. In the first year, we really focus on helping our grade 7 children to take ownership of their learning, whether it is in setting up their timetables, how they manage their work, in everyday life. The principle of ownership is woven into everything. The literature that we have chosen and that we use in the program shows us this. We can ask the questions, well, that person didn't take ownership, or this person did. What happened? What did not happen? And in the process, they are not just learning to see consequences, but they are also learning the skill of critical thinking. The next one is ownership builds discipline. So students are then still continuing honing their arts of grammar and dialectic, but now through daily disciplines, they are learning while they enjoy community, conversations, mentoring, friendships. They are starting to own their story more and more. They write their own story, and they also participate in a mock trial in the second year of our program, of the high school program. And again, like I said, these principles are woven into everything that we do. Then the third year is discipline becomes the cornerstone of freedom. And there's so much to say about this. But we start challenging them to think even more deeply while improving their reading, their writing, and all their dialectic skills. They participate in formal debate in this year. They go through policy documents and governmental documents, and they start weighing them together and comparing them, our country versus America, or whatever it is, to see the differences and to see the consequences of things not used or not implied. Then we say, freedom provides the opportunity for noble choices. When I am free, I can make a good decision. Students are now actually starting to we ask them to weigh the value and the consequences of important decisions made by literary figures, by historical people, by great artists. We help them to see what shaped Western thought and what influenced our 21st century thinking. Students learn and practice new types of rhetorical skills in this year. Then eventually, all choices bring consequences. How do we wish that all the leaders that we know about realize this? All choices bring consequences. This is woven into through the program, through the literature, and we really want our children to see their unique place in society and what the decisions that they are making, what consequences this will bring. And then lastly, when we can understand consequences, we are leaders. And that is what we aim for. We want our children to become leaders, whether they are stepping into big business, leading a family, doesn't matter what they do. If they can understand that all choices bring consequences, they will become the leaders of the future. Can you imagine if we have a society of people that has been trained in this way, that has been trained to think, that has been trained and taught how to learn, how to study anything, and what that will mean for the world that we live in? Thank you.